do this. And we'll start here. So let's go. Stacy, it's up to you. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to another edition of Around the Table, Politics 2020. I'm Stacy Smith. This is where we discuss the political state of things and some other thoughts. I'll begin our discussion with a look at the latest poll on Pennsylvania presidential race. This is from Monmouth University, and it shows that basically Joe Biden has a 4-point lead over the president, down from 13 points in July. Higher voter turnout, Biden is up by 3 points, and lower voter turnout, he is up by only 1 point. The tightening of the race in Pennsylvania is just one of the topics that we will be discussing as we go around the table today. And I'd like to introduce you to our panelists now, and those panelists include, of course, former Governor Tom Corbett. Governor Corbett served also as the State Attorney General and also as the U.S. Attorney for Western District of Pennsylvania. Also, as we go around the table, we will find Amanda Green Hawkins. Amanda served as a National Committee woman representing Pennsylvania to the Democratic Party. Amanda also served on the Allegheny County Council and is currently an attorney for a major union that's based here in Pittsburgh. So let's go back around the table again to the Republican side. And there's where we find Chris Fry. Chris is the mayor of Newcastle, so he has a unique perspective on politics. It gives him some insight on how federal and state governments can and perhaps do not sometimes work with local governments. He's also representing an area in Pennsylvania that helped Donald Trump win the presidency, and an area the Democrats, of course, would like to take back. And now we turn to the great philosopher around the table. That would be Joe Mystic. Joe is a familiar name in Democratic politics across the state. Joe has had several roles in city government for Pittsburgh and also served as deputy mayor for the city. Joe teaches law now at Duquesne University. He also has a column weekly in the Trib. I want to thank all of you for joining us again for Around the Table, but I want to begin the discussion with you, Joe. All of you like to say that the polls leading up to an election don't mean all that much. Only the polls a week or two before the election can carry that much weight. But the earlier polls can show perhaps a trend developing. Here's what I mean. It's not just the real clear politics, or rather the Monmouth poll, the real clear politics average for Pennsylvania shows that on July the 24th, the former vice president, had an 8.5-point lead over Donald Trump. As of today, that lead is down to 3.2%. So I ask you, Joe, is there a trend developing here for Donald Trump in Pennsylvania?
Well, I think that we all knew that a race like this tightens as you get closer to Election Day. That's the rule across the board because television advertising and other media have a lot to do with tightening that race. Long before the nation was so evenly split, though, Pennsylvania was evenly split. If you're a Democrat, a victory of by 4 or 5% is something we call a landslide. Governor Corbett can talk about that. He racked up a major victory. But from the Democratic end of it, 4 to 5% translates into 300 or 400,000 votes, and that's a big victory for us in Pennsylvania. You just have to look at our history of electing Republicans statewide over the years, and you'll see that this was always going to be a close race in Pennsylvania.
Governor, your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with Joe, but I'll go back to what you said in the beginning. This is really just the beginning of polls starting to matter. Why they matter now is when you see that narrowing, it's going to send both camps into, okay, what do we need to do to fine tune our message? Let's just pick Pennsylvania right now. What are the areas? And I saw in the Monmouth poll that the 10 counties from southeastern to northeastern Pennsylvania, the president is doing much better than he had been doing earlier in the summer or late spring. And that's somewhat surprising to see that number. Keep in mind that Scranton is where Biden is from. That's part of the Northeast. The Southeast has been predominantly Democrat now, with the southeastern counties surrounding Philadelphia becoming Democrat registered. So I was surprised at that. And I think when you're looking at the polls, that's something to follow very closely. 40% of the electorate in Pennsylvania is in the 5 or 6 southeastern counties, from Allentown down to Philadelphia and over to Chester and Lancaster counties. We can make the difference out here as a Republican in Western Pennsylvania. But as I said, 40% of that vote is coming out of that very small area. The other aspect of it is that I think it's going to cause more people who may have been sitting on the fence to contributing to the president or to the vice president to contribute. And you're going to see more money raised as a result of these numbers, either out of optimism or a little bit of apprehension on the part of the Biden campaign.
You might be right on that. I believe that the number is like $394 million that the Biden campaign raised in the month of August, which is a record-setting amount. So obviously, he's got a lot of support coming in that way. I want to bring in Amanda Green Hawkins now. Amanda, you served as a national committee woman for the Democratic National Party, and you take a look at these polls. I know about one or two episodes ago, you said, when the former vice president had such a big lead, that you can't take it for granted.
That's right. You certainly can't take it for granted. And remember, I served on the Democratic National Committee during the Obama administration. And it was during Hillary Clinton's run in 2016 where we saw a big difference from what we expected from the polls. And so I keep saying since then, we cannot rely on the polls. And for all of those voters out there who either want to reelect Trump or who want Biden or who don't want either one, they can't count on someone else to do the work. They've got to turn out, they've got to vote themselves. And so I always say, don't rely on what the polls are saying because there's so many nuances that they may not know about. For example, this race is tightening. Well, who are you talking to? Where do they live? And they talk about likely voters. Well, I'm a super voter. And I have never been called to respond to one of these polls. So it tells you that there's information missing. While they're reporting some information, there's still information missing. You gotta go out and do the work and vote yourself. That's what you gotta do.
You raise a good point there because a lot of people said that the polls taken for 2016 were not accurate and then they did not really include enough Republicans in the polls to show that indeed the president, now the president, was going to win that election. So you raise a good point. Let's bring in Mayor Chris Fry. Chris, we talk about you living in Newcastle, the mayor of Newcastle, and that area went Republican. Is it going to go Republican again this time? Is this poll reflective of that?
It's hard to tell at this point, and I do agree with everybody, and I really agree with Amanda because I'm hearing it a lot as well. I haven't got called for a poll. I'm a super voter, and I haven't seen anything come across. Newcastle is unique. I attended an event last night, and you drive through town, you see Biden signs everywhere. But it was the same for me when I was running for office. Is you ride through town, you see the other opponents, and then the silent voters do come out. I still think that's a big advantage for the Trump administration. I think on another side, outside of the polls, another perspective to look at is what's being said. And I've talked to numerous Trump administrative team, and they've mentioned to me, they're kind of staying apolitical. They're looking at both sides. So I think they're trying to grab, and that may be where some of the, the numbers are changed. They're really trying to grab some of the folks that are out there who are unsure at this time. And they're just showing, Democrat, Republican. We saw that a lot in the convention. And I hear it as I go around to different events, both Democrat and Republican events. I'm hearing that they're not, pushing a full Republican agenda, but more just an American agenda. And I think that might be why numbers are changing.
All right, so what you're saying is you're talking to the Trump supporters or the Trump people in the Trump administration, and they're not necessarily pushing the president as much as the things that he might stand for. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right. Yes, that's exactly what you're hearing. And that just comes from about 5 different events that I've taken part in, and they're really pushing the what he stands for, what the legislation, the impacts of the legislation that has been passed over the last couple, over his first term. So that's what I'm hearing a lot of. And maybe, I know we talked about it before with the strategy of Biden picking Kamala Harris for his VP, which we knew was going to hit some of the emotional and the heartstrings of a lot of people. I think the momentum is building now in that regard, that they're getting the word out and just showing facts. And nothing against either party. It's just, whenever you're going to start pulling out the ammo is really when you're going to start to see the tides change.
I want to
Stacy, man, I'd like to put these polls in a little bit more perspective, and my views are consistent with Amanda's on this. These polls that we're talking about here, they're entertainment polls. These are great to talk about. I mean, they pass for entertainment during a pandemic, I should say. It's it's something to talk about. But they're sponsored by the media outlet. They're sponsored by universities. They don't have a lot of money. We're talking, when people say I'm a super voter and I've never been called, well, that's because these polls call about 300 to 400 people. That's a standard sample. The polls that count are the internal polls of the two campaigns. They invest a huge amount of money in those polls. They dig very deep. They take a much broader sample and they get into great, great detail. I'd give anything to look at those polls right now and see where these two campaigns, I think this thing is headed based upon what they found out.
Well, given what you just said, maybe we do know that indeed southwestern Pennsylvania might be a key to Pennsylvania, because this past week we saw the vice president come in on Monday.
Right.
The president is due in here this evening at Latrobe. Both of the two presidential candidates will be in Shanksville a week from tomorrow in honor of those great souls who lost their lives to stop the terrorists. And we just learned this morning that Vice President Pence is coming back in here a week I believe it's on September the 9th. So given what you just said about the internal polling, when do you remember both, I'm going to ask all of you really, that southwestern Pennsylvania has attracted so much attention from the presidential candidates? I don't remember it. I've been here for a long time.
I remember when JFK and Richard Nixon debated in the city of McKeesport. So I go back a ways on this. Right. And we've always been a hotbed of political competition. This is a prize if you win Pennsylvania. And so this is a place where a lot of these big fights break out. This is no exception.
But let me comment on it. I think it's much more in play now than it was 10, 15 years ago. The Democrat voter registration age in southwestern Pennsylvania is not where it was 10 or 15 years ago. If you take a look at the counties surrounding Allegheny County, Washington County, Westmoreland County, Butler, Beaver, they have, I believe, all four of those have a commissioner system that it has Republicans heading up the commissioner system. So the dynamics have changed, and we could spend 2 shows talking about just how those dynamics have changed. But as a result of that, and talking about the internal polls, and those polls, the binder on a poll is about this thick because of all the detail you get, tells me that both sides view this as winnable. They got to pay attention. I wonder what it looks like for the Southeast and Northeast based upon what Mama says. But it demonstrates at this point. Now, if we get to the beginning of October and those polls start changing, then you may not see the president or the vice president here as much. I think the vice president has to come here as much. I think the vice president, unfortunately, because of COVID, lost one of his greatest opportunities in the lack of a Labor Day parade for him to go walking down the street. I've seen him in the Labor Day parade. He works a crowd better than anybody I've ever been around who I've met. Slaps people on the back, hugs them, kisses them. You can't do that today. And that's a loss of a lot of earned media that you can't get back. So we'll see.
Well, let me just comment. And Governor Corbett, you certainly can hug and kiss people to the extent that they are willing to allow you to do that, because I have
not at a parade, not today.
Yeah, I've met plenty of politicians, right? And with COVID-19, maybe not. But I've met plenty of politicians. I've met presidential candidates. I've met presidents, and it's been right here in Pennsylvania. I've been in Pennsylvania since early 2000s, about 2002. And I have always seen Republican and Democratic candidates for president, vice president coming through southwestern Pennsylvania. And it is very important to turning the election, and that's why they're spending so much time here. Governor Corbett was just talking about southeastern Pennsylvania and how it's heavily Democratic and where the Republican votes are going to come from. And so they understand, both candidates understand where they have to work. And that's why they're here. And it makes a difference to the people, whether they meet them or not, that they've actually showed up where they live, work, and play, and show that they care about them.
Well, and I think people were taking the lesson of Hillary Clinton, who did not go to Wisconsin when she should have gone to Wisconsin, was here in Pennsylvania somewhat, but she took the appearances, took states for granted that they were going to be in her column. They're not going to let that happen again.
I would have to agree with that, Governor. I would agree with that.
You know, sometimes a candidate wins a race, and sometimes a candidate simply loses the race. And that's an example of the candidate losing the race. It was hers to lose, and she lost it.
I'd like to bring up something that Mayor Fright pointed out. And he's saying that when he's talking to the Trump officials, whether they be in the campaign or whether they be in the administration of some sort, that when they're talking about re-electing the president, they're not necessarily talking about the president himself, but rather the ideals or ideas that he stands for. On the other side of the coin, we have Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, who early on decided to make Donald Trump the reason to not elect him again. Where do you think this is going to go?
If this race is about Donald Trump, he doesn't have a chance. He has to make this race about something else. He's not a likable person. Even his friends, so-called friends, speak ill of him, as we're finding out on a lot of these tape-recorded conversations that are starting to come out. So, you know, the Democrats want this to be about Donald Trump and his character or lack thereof. And he wants it to be about anything but him, because if it's about him, he can't win this.
Yeah, Mayor Fry's comments made me think about this whole idea about polls tightening and what's leading to it. And we look at what's been happening over the summer, and we've had a lot of protests in a lot of major cities across the country, even in suburbs across the country. And some of the protests have included violence, not necessarily by the organizers, but by whoever it may be, as law enforcement may determine. There are people who are rioting and looting and that kind of thing. And the whole idea of, you know, for you who live in the suburbs, do you want this type of violence? Well, I will be the law and order president. That seems to be resonating with a lot of voters. And that may be what's causing some of the shifts in some of the polling, to the extent that we can rely on it. I think that that is making some people move in a certain direction.
David Byler
It
has
certainly is
column in the-
strategy.
Go ahead, Mayor. I'm sorry.
It certainly is strategy, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, because we did talk about it extensively a few weeks ago, again with the Kamala Harris pick, and even a few weeks prior to that, is that he was anticipating putting a woman into that position. It's political game, it's political nature, but I think they're structuring it in a way that, you know, it's obviously showing some type of shift. I know these polls aren't the best resource, but it's showing some type of shift. And again, with my ear to the ground is probably my best place to be, you know, in terms of talking to people and being close to both sides. I'm not, you know, saying that just one side. I'm interested to hear what people are feeling, and just being a young African-American male and as a Republican, I'm saying, you know, it's having that emotional effect. I'm following folks on social media, and I see that, you know, other young men around my age who are interested and were encouraged and inspired by what they saw at the RNC, and folks stand up to, you know, to support Donald Trump. And so it's kind of having that same effect. It's having that same effect.
David Byler has a column in the Washington Post today with a headline, "Nobody can predict this election." And he lists 8 reasons why this election is different than any other. And it includes things like the pandemic. It's been 100 years since we've had an election during a pandemic. The protests. These protests are polling more favorably than protests have in the past, that's for sure. And a lot of white voters who have been polled are more supportive of this round of protests than they have been in the past. The stock market, which is mysteriously, remarkably doing well, and the fact that for the first time the mailbox is the ballot box. These are things we've never encountered before. So predicting an election under circumstances like this is going to be difficult.
Yeah, but it's that connection that's being made from the protest to the violence. Connecting the two is, and it's all in how you frame it, all in how you portray it. And that's making the difference, I think, to some people. Now, I can say, as someone who has been out there a number of times since May and various marches and rallies, I have taken my 5-year-old daughter with me because I have no questions, no concerns about the safety of it. And when things turn violent, it is often 2 or 3 people, and then it becomes maybe larger to maybe 10 people or so who are doing all of those things, when the vast majority of the protesters are just sitting there awestruck and thinking, how in the world did this happen, and who are these people?
Now that narrative is changing, and with the arrival of so-called militia members, I don't know why they're not called gang members, but they call themselves militia members. With their arrival with weapons, attacking some of these peaceful protesters, I think the narrative shifts. I think that it creates sympathy on the Democratic side, on the progressive side. So that kind of violence cuts both ways.
Joe, I have to add in on that. And I said this years ago. I knew that Trump was going to win Westmoreland County 4 years ago because of all the Trump signs I saw there when I was teaching at St. Vincent along Route 30.
Yeah, right.
I didn't see any Clinton signs. I'm not seeing Trump or Biden signs here in the North Hills at the moment. But what I am seeing are signs in neighborhoods, predominantly white neighborhoods. Black Lives Matter, and we support our police with the blue line flag.
And
and they're in yards that
you can do both. You can do both.
Yeah.
Defunding the police is some mythological idea that detractors of the Black Lives Matter like to point to. It's not real.
And let me
Wait, I have to. Joe, are you saying that nobody's said defund the police?
No serious person has said defund the police. Some far left radicals may have said that, and it's probably repeated more often by the far right as a reason to attack the progressive movement. No one serious has said defund the police. People have talked about reorganizing the police. The governor and I are involved and have been involved for a few years now, talking about how we might improve our criminal justice system and what kinds of changes we can make. Reorganizing the police, redistributing those kinds of funds, bringing in folks who can address the mental health issues that police encounter on the streets better than a police officer might, giving a police officer the freedom to do police work and not be chasing your lost dog or respond to things that really do not require someone with a badge and a gun. We're talking about redistributing some of this and reorganizing the police so they can do their job better. And so society can get better service out of their tax dollars.
I'd like to go a different way right now, a different topic. And Governor, I'm going to present it to you. Joe Biden, when he was in town, which was one of his first appearances outside of the state of Delaware, by the way, on Monday, was at a facility owned by CMU. And I have a pretty good authority that there were fewer than 25 people inside that building when the vice president delivered his major speech here in Pittsburgh. When the president comes to town, and will be tonight, there will be a crowd of people there. Maybe not as large as there used to be because of COVID, but at the same time, he has a crowd there. Is this going to make a difference, you think, as we go into the campaign? If the vice president continues to have events where there's not a large crowd, is this going to hurt him, in your opinion?
Well, that takes me back to what I was talking about earlier about the missed opportunity of a Labor Day parade because of the restrictions. And it has affected him. And I think the president has just said, we're going to have the meetings. We're going to have the rallies. That is, to a certain extent, superficial, but it encourages at least the base to come out. And if I were in the Biden campaign, I'd be looking to at least have a couple hundred people in an area they could have done on the football field or somewhere when he was speaking. my observation, and they've taken some of that speech and used it in commercials, is you could tell he wasn't talking to anybody. It was kind of flat. He had great words, but it was kind of flat. It wasn't, I'm talking to this large group of people and I'm enthused about what I'm talking about. And it's just a stylistic thing. I think that you will see him start coming out and getting in positions where people have the opportunity to come up and say hello to him, particularly in the key swing states. Be interesting to see what he does in southeastern Pennsylvania and goes back to Scranton and in northwestern Pennsylvania. If he doesn't have a little larger crowd than, a couple dozen.
I attended an event where he had, go ahead, Joe.
I thought the vice president's appearance was well handled. It was a secret. It was a secret until the last minute as to where he was going to speak. It was leaked finally by Bill Peduto, I think. And his campaign did not want it leaked because they did not want a crowd because it's not safe. And so I think that's a message that he's a responsible candidate. I don't think it hurts him. I think it helps him. Mayor?
So were you saying Biden or Pence? I'm sorry.
Well, we say the vice president. It's the former vice president when he came to Pittsburgh on Monday.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's what I'm misunderstanding. I attended an event with Mr. Pence. I thought because I heard vice president. That's what I thought you mentioned. Yeah. So okay. I'm not familiar with that one.
All right. Yeah.
I don't think that the low turnout with the crowd means much, especially in an era where we're dealing with the pandemic. I am a delegate. I have been a super delegate, member of the DNC, elected official here and all of that. And I used to get invited to everything. During this pandemic, not so much. And I can understand that they don't want people exposed and at risk. So I don't think that's a big deal. It was just 2 weeks ago where we had the convention where we had hundreds of people in parking lots looking at big screens and cheering for Vice President Biden. So I don't think it means much.
Well,
not in this era.
Well, you say that, but at the same time, we see a shrinkage in the polls here in southwestern Pennsylvania for the former vice president.
Right, and look at the polls. Who are they talking to? Again, I'm just so skeptical of the polls. The only one that really matters is on election day. These polls in between are distractions, and we need to just turn out and vote.
All right,
there's a large group of Americans that want to see a president. I know both of their ages are in question, but they want to see somebody that doesn't succumb to the fears and doesn't succumb to the virus, but that'll keep pushing. You want a leader that is brave and has that. And I hope that there was another reason for only having 25, but I know that in the eyes of the voters, they want to see somebody that's not going to back down to those type of things and just keep pushing forward. So,
well, as for this voter, as for me, I think that shows political courage to say to people, I don't want you here. I'm gonna do this without you in the room because I care about your health. I care about your safety. And I think that's the courageous stance.
Spoken like a true Biden supporter, without question, Joe. I want to move on to another subject here, if we can, possibly. We've talked about before, when this pandemic hit, the powers of the governor and what he did in emergency declarations. Now, he faced a situation where an emergency declaration, he had to stop the moratorium on evictions. He could no longer do that legally. And the Republican legislature right now, after he's come to them and saying, I want to be able to do this again, is saying, well, let's wait a minute. Let's talk about this for a while. Governor, have we seen now a change in the power structure going on in Harrisburg because of emergency powers not being able to be renewed?
Well, it's only emergency power in regard to this one area, because you've seen just recently he signed another 90-day extension of this. And there's been a court case that says he can do that. I don't necessarily agree with it because I think there's supposed to be a balance. But when he's come to the realization, and maybe he did this on purpose to put the blame on the Republicans in the legislature, that this period of time would be suspended. And part of me wants to say, now he's come to the table because he needs to come to the table. Part of me says he's not going to do much at the table, and he's going to try and let the Republicans wear this. part of this whole change in the polls, I wonder how much it has to do with the whole approach to the virus here, the pandemic here, and the governor's approach to it, and how people are kind of fed up with having to stay at home and not be able to go to their restaurants and stuff. It's a mixed bag across the board. Not everybody's as strongly in support of it as others. And I wonder whether that's going to filter into somebody's thinking come 2 months from today.
I think the proof's in the pudding. We've had a remarkably successful response to this virus. Our number of cases it puts us in pretty good shape nationally compared to other states. And certainly in southwestern Pennsylvania, our numbers are very good. This is hard. This is hard to do. But if you do it, you get good results. Less people die, less people get sick. And I think as unpopular as some of these measures may be, at the end of the day, any governor will be measured by those final results.
And we also have to look at what's the result if the moratorium is not extended. Are we talking about putting families out on the street in the middle of a pandemic? Who wants to wear that?
Well,
and rely on our government to help people out. So we got to do something.
If there's a willingness from the governor to work with the legislature, they can do it. But he has to give some. He's not been giving at all with anything that the legislature's tried to do. And this is his time to demonstrate the ability to compromise in the face of this pandemic. I have not seen it to date. And I think you need to see that.
I rely on the courts at the end of the day. Back when Big Steel collapsed in the 80s and early 90s, Judge Nicholas Papadakis was head of the civil division, and he refused to hear any mortgage foreclosures. He wrote that to a seat on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court a couple of years later. I don't know if any judges or magistrates will be throwing people out of their homes into the street, evicting them, whether there's a moratorium or not. The courts are the final bulwark against injustice, and I believe that will work its way here as well.
We will see whether you indeed are correct on that, Joe, as time goes on. I want to thank all of you for being with us once again on Around the Table, Politics 2020, and we'll see you again next week. Great discussion today. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.